Okay, thank you, Lauren. Um, yesterday we talked about identification of a number of woody plants. We talked about bamboo as a grass and a couple of forbs, the um, herbaceous plants that are good targets for winter. And today we're going to talk about how to manage them, how to control them. Um, our organization, the Blue Ridge PRISM, is the Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. We're considered to be a cooperative weed management area. West of the Mississippi, we have a lot of CWMAs. East of the Mississippi, we have a lot of PRISMs. We all have the same goal. Our area of concern starts in central Virginia and goes northeast up the Shenandoah to West Virginia and Maryland. It covers 12 counties and about 3.6 million acres. Our core purpose is to improve the health of our natural world for future generations. So we're going to talk about how to treat the plants that we saw yesterday by plant type, starting out with woody plants, trees, shrubs, and vines, where your management mechanisms are all pretty much the same. Then we'll look at bamboo as an example of a grass that you can treat in winter. Most of the grasses, winter's not the best time to be treating them. They died back, can't do much about them. And we will look at a couple of forbs that are good winter targets. But starting with woody plants, well, actually, we'll look at two different categories of techniques: physical techniques and chemical techniques, herbicide-assisted ones. For physical techniques, you can accomplish control with them. Well, rather, the best time to use a physical technique is when you can accomplish your goal by using that physical technique effectively and efficiently, which means no regrowth and without excessive effort. There are other occasions when you have to use physical techniques where, by regulation, for instance, you're not allowed to use herbicides. For a lot of our management techniques, you can use either physical or chemical or combination techniques. When you can only use physical, the techniques we're going to be looking at shortly are the ones that are appropriate. And then there are occasions where if you're not an herbicide user, you're going to be strictly using physical techniques. So if you can get the job done effectively using physical techniques, use them. If you can't use herbicide, you're going to have to use them. If you don't choose to use herbicide, you're going to use physical techniques. And this is what we're going to look at as the different categories of approaches, physical approaches that you can use. We'll look at each of these categories individually, starting with hand pulling. So hand pulling works well for new growth, for plants which have not established a significant root structure yet. They're easy to pull out of the ground. They're most practical. This technique is most practical for small invasions. So you're not going to do this if you got an acre of whatever the plant is, because you'd need an army of people to do it. If you can get the entire root system out or most of the root system out, it will not grow back. So it's a great technique to use. Herbicide users do hand pulling all the time. They don't always use herbicide. If you don't have to, we don't. It's only going to be effective when the soil is moist, which in this part of Virginia for the last few months, we've been in what's essentially pretty close to a drought. So hand pulling is not too effective if the soil is very dry. Soil has to be moist. So winter is a good time because not only do you have rain occasionally, but sometimes you have snow, and snow is really good at soaking the soil and making hand pulling easy. The snows that we have here in this part of Virginia don't stay very long, unlike north of here. The snow will be gone in 2 or 3 days. The soil is nice and wet. Hand pulling is easy. So when you first grab a hold of the plant, as you see here in this photo in the upper right, you don't just kind of grab it and jerk it. You want to kind of wiggle it around a little bit and get a sense for whether it feels like it's going to pull. And if it does, continue pulling, get it out of the ground. But if it's just not budging, you're going to have to go to other techniques, because if you break it off at the surface, you've left the roots in and it's going to grow back and you really haven't accomplished anything. Um, the one kind of catch about hand pulling is that it disturbs the soil. You're pulling the plant up, you're disturbing the soil, and soil disturbance can promote germination of the invasive seeds that are in the seed bed. So one thing that you want to do after you've pulled it out of the ground is you want to tamp that soil back down again and cover it with some forest litter to try to discourage the tendency for it to cause germination of invasive seeds. And if you try to hand pull it and it won't come, your next step could be to assist getting it out of the ground by grubbing, digging, extraction, using one type of tool or another to help you get the roots of the plant out of the ground. And here's several examples of how you can do that. You can even do larger shrubs up to 4 or 5 feet tall, as you see here, using this particular mechanism, which is called an extractor. It clamps around the base of the stem, and then with that long handle, it gives you extra leverage to be able to pull it out of the ground and get its roots out. Again, with all of these techniques, they're going to create soil disturbance. So you're going to need to tamp down the soil, fill in the hole that's left with loose soil, and cover it with forest litter to discourage invasive seed germination. Your next option is cutting. And you can get most of the work that you do with woody invasive plants done with common pruning tools like this, a hand cutter, loppers, a folding saw, or a straight saw. And you're going to use a tool that's appropriate for whatever the size of the stem is that you're cutting. And as your stems get larger, you'll advance upward from a saw blade, as we see here in the upper left, to mechanized devices. This particular tool here is called a brush cutter, and it's a weed whacker. And you've taken off the string device at the tip of it and put on a saw blade. And this is a very effective, albeit a tool you have to be very careful with, very effective tool for cutting woody stems. Here you see it cutting, this by the way is an 8-inch blade, so you got 4 inches of cutting surface here. This is about a 6-inch stem of I think that's an autumn olive. And you'll cut halfway in on this side, cut halfway in on the other side, and you can take out a plant that's up to about 6 inches. Once you get beyond that, you're probably into chainsaw material like we see over here. Other techniques, mowing. This is a bush hog, but you can be mowing with a lawnmower. There are kind of larger scale mowers that are designed for larger stems until you get up to a bush hog like this, which you can use out in open areas. And then kind of the top of the line for this is this particular mechanism here, which is called a forestry mulcher. And as you can see on the forest floor here, all that's left of this area of, I think this is primarily a mix of autumn olive and privet, is wood chips. It simply grinds it all up and leaves you with an open area, which you can then wait till the next growing season and see what comes back up. There will probably be a mix of invasive plants, which you will then have, they'll be small and you can hand pull them. And there'll probably be a good deal of the seeds of native plants coming up as well that have been being discouraged by the invasives that were there. So forestry mulcher is what you use when you have to do basically starting over in an area that's just been completely overtaken by woody invasives. Tarping is an effective technique that you can use it any time of year, including in the winter. And it's basically a way of smothering low-lying plants like vinca. Well, here's a list of the ones that you can apply it to. The ones that are low-lying plants. You place the tarp down, hold it down with various things. You can pile mulch on it. You can use stones, various ways to keep it in place. And usually it only has to stay in place for about one growing season. And you'll want to be checking out underneath it after a season to see what the condition is underneath. And most likely everything's going to be dead. And you can then take it up and seed, or you can just wait again and see what's going to come up. You'll probably have a mix of invasives coming up plus natives. Control the invasives, foster the growth of the natives. And then there's grazing. We use this particular technique in this location because the slope is really steep, and it would have been hard getting in there and moving around without falling all over yourself because it's so steep. If you have to find a goat herd who has experience in vegetation management, you have to keep in mind that the goats are going to eat pretty much anything there that's green. So you only want to use it in situations where the majority, if not all, of the vegetation is invasive because they're going to eat whatever's there. And here you see them starting out, and here you see them over here, literally fat and happy. So it is a technique that you can use. And another thing you can do that's purely physical and doesn't involve removing the invasive is containment. And this is something you can use, for instance, in this example, here we're looking at someone's neighbor, hopefully not yours, has decided to use bamboo as a privacy screen. Well, that bamboo is going to come onto your property unless you do something. And you can use what's called a bamboo shield. And here you can see you dig a small ditch, maybe about 18 inches deep, and you lay in this plastic, which is called bamboo shield, and backfill behind it. And you would think that this little, 3 or 4 mil plastic isn't going to be very effective, and yet it is. And the reason is because at the tips of the tubers on the bamboo, they're very, very minute, and they can't get through the plastic. So it's a very effective technique. It's relatively low cost, and it can keep bamboo from moving onto your property. So it doesn't kill the bamboo, it just keeps it away from you. A similar technique, if you decide that you just have to have your English ivy as a ground cover, or winter creeper, or vinca, just keep it from climbing. Keep it away from anything vertical because it can climb trees and kill the trees. Not so much your vinca, but your English ivy, winter creeper, and so on are tree killers. So just keep it away from them. Also, if you're not at the point yet where you want to get rid of your favorite shrubs like leatherleaf mahonia, burning bush, heavenly bamboo, just before they become ripe, when they're still green, snip off the seeds, and that'll keep it from spreading. So these techniques don't make the invasive plant go away, but they will keep them from spreading. And there are a number of additional physical techniques that you can use that we don't have time to get into here, but we'd recommend that you take a look at this particular document. It's out from the state of California. So when you get this video, just activate this URL here and get yourself a copy of this. There's, I think, about 30 different physical-only techniques here. And despite the fact it's coming out of California, there are still a number of additional ones that I didn't have time to get into here that are detailed in this text that can be very useful to you. So check it out. Okay, let's look at chemical techniques, that is herbicide-assisted techniques. There are a couple of chemical techniques which strictly use herbicide. and they're called basal bark, where you spray the bark of a plant with an herbicide that'll penetrate through the bark and kill the roots of a woody plant. Or foliar spray, where you're spraying the foliage, that is, you're spraying the leaves. So that's purely chemical. There's no physical activity involved. But there are other techniques which are very common where you do two things. You first do something physical to open up access to the plant's vascular system, and then you apply the herbicide to that opening. And those techniques are mainly what's called cut stump, where you typically cut the plant down, you cut it off at ground level, and then you apply a little bit of herbicide around the base of the stump. And hack and squirt or scrape and squirt, where you hack typically with a hatchet into the stem of the plant, create an opening, and apply a little bit of herbicide into that opening. And gravity basically is going to take the herbicide down into the roots and kill the roots. That's a very low effort technique that we'll look at in some detail as we go along here. So why do people use herbicides? Herbicides are poison. You have to be careful with their use. The reason that they're used is there are certain plants where, well, for instance, let's say you're hand pulling and you don't get all of the roots out, or you're using some kind of a technique to help you to get the plant out of the ground, grubbing or digging or whatever, and you don't get all the roots, it's going to grow back. If you're cutting a plant and not using herbicide, as you can see in this photograph here, you see a number of cut ends on this particular plant, which I believe was autumn olive. And stem cutting stimulates stem sprouting, and you can see all the new growth sprouting from it. So this means, it's not the end of the world. You got most of the plant, but you're going to have to come back and cut this new growth. And you're going to have to do that repeatedly, typically 4 or 5, maybe even a half a dozen times before you've exhausted the stored energy in the roots, such that it will not regrow anymore. So one of the reasons herbicide is used is you treat it once and that plant is gone. It won't resprout. You don't have to go back and do it over again. There are also plants like tree of heaven. Here's a tree of heaven. You can see the stump of it here. It was blown down in a storm, and its natural reaction to whatever, if you cut it down or if it blows down, is to survive by popping up root sprouts from its entire root system. These are all new tree of heaven trees, and they're sprouts from the root system. And you can imagine, we're only looking at a very small section of it here. There's probably about 50 of these sprouts. So you got rid of one tree and you got 50 new ones back. If you'd used herbicide, if you're dealing with a tree of heaven in particular and a couple of other trees that have this root sprouting capability, you just treat it once, the tree's dead, it doesn't resprout. So there are a few species where they're virtually impossible to control without herbicide. And then the third situation where people tend to use herbicide is where you have too much stuff to be able to handle with physical techniques. In a situation like this is stilt grass, but it could just as easily be wavy leaf grass. It could be garlic mustard. It could be any of the creeping vines where you have an acre or 2 acres or 3 acres of it, where it's covering the entire forest floor. You're not going to hand pull it. You can't get in there to work with a mower, so you don't have much of an option to using foliar spray. So use of herbicides is something that you have to be very cautious about. And when you purchase a container of herbicide, it has a label, and it's not like the normal label that you'll find like on a can of food or something like that. It's an extremely detailed and informative piece of information, and it's the law. It tells you what the product is, what its active ingredients are, what the environmental hazards the use of it poses, and how you can minimize those. It talks about how to keep from affecting pollinators when using the herbicide, which often is simply a matter of don't use the herbicide when the pollinators are around, which is not it's not the whole year. It's one of the reasons why winter application of herbicide is preferable, because you don't have pollinators around. The label is going to give very specific directions for use, and it gives those in for a variety of different situations that you could be working in, and a variety of different targets for your woody plants, for your forbs, for your grasses, for meadow situations, for utility easement situations, for nursery situations. It's all covered in the label. So instead of getting into much detail on the mechanics and of use of herbicides, now we're going to talk more about the techniques for using them. And Blue Ridge PRISM is going to be we're in the process of developing a session specifically on demystifying the use of herbicides and simplifying it with safety in mind and protection of native plants. We'll be putting that together for issuance probably in the middle of next year. But moving along, one very obvious thing about using herbicide is you need to protect yourself. And this photograph kind of scares me. What you want to be doing when you're spraying herbicide is you want rubber boots that are coming up to about your knees, long pants, long shirt. This gentleman is actually wearing flesh-colored non-absorbent gloves. It doesn't look like he's wearing gloves, but he is wearing gloves. And he's wearing eye protection. And he happens to be working next to a roadway, so you see he has a safety vest on as well, which doesn't have anything much to do with herbicide. But it's another aspect of safety that you need to keep in mind when you're working on invasive plants. Here we've got short sleeves, short pants, heavens knows what she has on her feet, no gloves. Her eye protection is on the top of her head. Scary. Okay, so herbicide application techniques. When you're strictly using herbicide, you're not doing anything physical to the plant as well. There are two techniques. Foliar spray, which is spraying the foliage, spraying the leaves, and basal bark spraying, which is spraying the bark. You typically spray from ground level up to about 18 inches. Now, one thing I'll point out in this photograph that's pretty important, excuse me, this gentleman's probably, 5'10", 6 feet tall, and he's spraying a plant that's just about that height. And he's spraying downward. You don't want to try to use foliar spray for anything where you might have to spray upward, because you can't control where your herbicide is going to go. When you're spraying downward, you're spraying it down onto the leaves. It can't go anywhere but where you're pointing it. Once you start spraying upward, you can lose control of it. So you don't want to do foliar spray for anything taller than about 5 to 6 feet. You'd want to be using some other technique for controlling that particular plant. Okay, so for foliar spray, spraying the leaves, first thing is you need to pick the right target. This is an invasive vine called five-leaf akebia, and you can see that there's a lot of space between the leaves. You have to be really good with your herbicide spray application to be able to hit a target like this that has so much space. This is your typical kind of target that you see down here, where the invasive plants are dense. There isn't anything else to hit except for invasive. This is English ivy. You'd see the same thing for winter creeper, for vinca, for you'll see second-year garlic mustard will look like this. It'll just cover everything and have outcompeted everything. That's a good target. And you need to get the herbicide off the ground, because let's say you take it off these trees. If you don't get it off the ground, it's just going to climb right back up. So when you're spraying the herbicide, you want to cover the entire leaf, but you don't want to put on enough that it's starting to drip off. It doesn't take a lot of herbicide to do the job. And again, you're spraying downward. You don't want a target that's over 5 or 6 feet tall, so you have to spray up and could lose control of where your herbicide is going. And here we have basal bark treatment where instead of spraying the leaves, you're spraying the stem of the tree. You're spraying the bark. And you can only do this for relatively small woody invasives, under 6 to 8 inches or so, because once they get larger than that, their bark is going to be thick enough that the herbicide isn't going to be able to penetrate. So I have to do it with smaller stems, 6 to 8 inch max. And the technique, you can see here's the nozzle. The individual is spraying from ground level up to about 16 to 18 inches, about 1.5 feet up, and each of the stems of the plant. And your sprayer has a trigger on it that activates it and then releases it. So you're going to spray one line and release. Spray again and release. You don't just spray and spray and spray. Control your spraying. That's how the technique works. And of course, you can do it in the winter. The herbicide that you use for basal bark treatment is not mixed in water, as most herbicides are. It's mixed in oil. And it's mixed in oil in order to assist the herbicide in penetrating through the bark and getting into the vascular system and then getting down to the roots. And the oil-based herbicides don't freeze. So you can do this on relatively cold days. The bark needs to be thin and dry. You don't want to do it after substantial rainfall or if the bark is soaked from contact with snow. It needs to be dry. Okay. So foliar spray and basal bark spray are the two techniques where you're just using herbicide. Now I'll go through a series of techniques that you can use where you're doing two things. You're using some kind of a physical action first to open up the vascular system of the plant to allow the herbicide to get in, then you apply the herbicide. And the two main techniques are called, as I mentioned before, cut stump. Here you see cut stump. This individual has just cut this invasive shrub, and now he's putting a little bit of herbicide around the base of the cut stump. And this is hack and squirt, where they're using a hatchet. They're hacking into the stem of a small tree. You can do this for small trees. You can do it for large vines, large shrubs. And then spraying a little bit of, or dripping a little bit of herbicide into that opening that you've created into the vascular system, and the herbicide will move down to the roots. So let's look at this a little more closely. You can use the cut stump approach, where you cut the plant off, typically down at ground level, and then apply the herbicide to any woody stem of any size. So if you're trying to hand pull something and it won't come, you can snip it off and apply a herbicide to the cut end. This is what's called a dauber. It's like a bingo bottle. It has a soft tip on it that has a valve in it. And if you touch that container's tip to a surface of a cut stem, it will release a small amount of herbicide. It won't release any until you touch the surface and press it on. So it's very, very specific and precise about where the herbicide is going to go. It's only going to go where you apply it. You can also use a drip bottle, and again, apply a little bit of herbicide around the edges of a cut stem. This is autumn olive. Or you can use a spray bottle, where you spray a little bit around the edges again. So you cut completely through the stem, usually down at ground level, and then apply your herbicide. And you want to apply the herbicide within a minute, because plants are designed to seal wounds so that nothing can get in. So you need to make your cut and then apply the herbicide right away. Otherwise, it may seal off and the herbicide may not absorb completely. And you'll use whatever cutting tool is appropriate for the size of the stem, and then apply the herbicide. Yep. I want to point out that you only have to apply herbicide right around the edges. excuse me, you don't apply it to like the entire stump as you see here. In fact, you'll notice that the color is light right around the edge and very dark in the center. That's because in the center, the herbicide isn't being absorbed at all because the vascular system at the center of the stem is blocked. It's no longer viable. It's no longer moving or capable of moving liquids up or down. If you look closely at the edges here, you can see a very light line right here. You can see it again right here, a little bit of it over here. That's where the vascular tissue is. That's where the only active vascular tissue is, right on the edge. So the significance of this is you don't have to use much herbicide. You only use a very, very small amount. Right around the edges. Okay, so this is hack and squirt. So instead of cutting the plant down, you're simply creating an opening in the stem and then applying the herbicide into that opening, into the open vascular tissue, and the herbicide will move downward into the roots by gravity, basically in winter, because there's not much movement in the vascular system in winter, because there's no photosynthesis going on in most of your plants, other than your evergreens. And usually you want to make your cut at about a 45-degree angle like that. If you make it wider, the herbicide can drip out. You don't want it dripping out. If you make it narrower, again, you're not getting a good cut into the vascular system. So cut it just about, think of the letter L, that's 90 degrees. Halfway is 45. And then most people that are using this technique apply the herbicide using a spray bottle. And you can stick the nozzle of that bottle right into the hack. So the herbicide isn't going anywhere but where the open vascular tissue is. And you just spray a little bit of it in. Placing the hacks is pretty important. I mentioned to you before that with Tree of Heaven, if you were to just cut a Tree of Heaven down, its natural reaction is to pop up a lot of root sprouts. So when you're doing hack and squirt for Tree of Heaven and pretty much any woody invasive, in order to avoid any problem with root sprouting, you have to kind of fool the tree. So what you do is you make a hack and leave some space, make another hack and leave some space. And in those spaces you're leaving viable vascular tissue. So the tree can still move liquids up and down through it. Basically, it doesn't know that you've killed it by leaving those spaces, by leaving that viable vascular tissue. So make your hack, leave a space, make your hack, leave a space. And that will not cause it to go into its survival mode and pop up root sprouts. We're talking here about winter application. So we're talking December, January, February, and partway into March. Once we get into spring, we get into a time of year when applying herbicide is tricky on the woody plants because they're starting to leaf out. So they're moving a lot of water and nutrients upward through the vascular system. And the force of movement is so strong that if you apply herbicide using cut stump or hack and squirt, the herbicide can't get down because there's so much upward pressure for flow up. But winter, again, this is another reason why winter is just a great time to be dealing with your woody invasive plants, because the tree is dormant. So you make the hacks, you open the vascular tissue, you apply the herbicide, gravity takes it down to the roots and kills the plant. Excuse me. One last note on hack and squirt. So hack and squirt kills the tree in place. It's still standing when you're done applying the herbicide. Over the ensuing 3-4 weeks, the roots are going to be killed by the herbicide. And now you have a dead standing tree. Well, in the forest, that's no big deal. You have dead standing trees in the forest all the time because trees live and trees die. But you have to think about where the particular tree or plant is that you're treating, because Normally, as a tree dies, it just drops its branches, and eventually its stem comes pretty much straight down just below where the tree was. But sometimes they can topple. So you would not want to use this technique if your target plant was a tree that's standing next to your house, or next to a road, or next to a hiking trail, or next to utility lines, because there is the possibility that the tree could topple after it dies and strike something, a road, a car going by, your house, whatever. So really these techniques are most useful for large trees anyhow, um, where they're situated such that they're eventually coming down will not harm anything. So there are some places where you can't use the technique for large trees. Now, you can use it not only on trees, you can use it for large stems of shrubs. This is privet. I use it with privet, autumn olive, all the time. If the stem is big enough to sustain a whack with a hatchet, it's a lot less effort than cutting the whole thing down and then applying herbicide. So you can see I've hacked it here, 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 and applied a little bit of herbicide into each of those stems. And here I'm applying it to a large stem of, this is English ivy. So you can use it for vines, you can use it for shrubs, you can use it for trees. A very flexible technique and a lot less effort than doing a lot of cutting with a saw. Okay, so let's look at a technique that we typically call scrape and squirt, because we're not hacking into our target. We're kind of just scraping off the outer layer of protection to open up the vascular system. And this is what you use, for instance, this is English ivy. And sometimes you have big vines on English ivy, and you can hack those because you don't have to be worried that your hatchet blade is going to go through the vine and into the tree. You don't want to harm the tree. But when you get into smaller vines, around this size or so, where they're too narrow for you to hack into them at a 45-degree angle, you just cut like this, almost straight down, and you're just stripping off a little bit of the outside protection of the bark. And that opens up the vascular tissue, and then you can apply your herbicide. Now, this technique isn't going to work if you're not an herbicide user. It's only if you're using herbicide. If you're not using herbicide, you've got to cut the stems, and we'll look at those techniques in a minute. Okay, so how do we deal with vines like this? So here's some free hanging vines. This is bittersweet, and they're big, thick vines. Here's some really thin vines, some kudzu vines and some porcelainberry vines. And we have different techniques for dealing with these hanging vines. Let's take a look at those. Well, actually, one form that you'll find bittersweet in, wisteria, Japanese honeysuckle, is they twine around the tree. They wrap around the tree. And for those, if you're not an herbicide user, you would just make one cut and a second cut and take out that center piece. And now the upper portion is no longer attached to the roots and it's going to die. And 80% of it is water weight. So it's going to lose all that weight. And eventually the vine will fall off the tree. But right away, it's losing all that weight, which is one of the factors that contributes to trees toppling because of invasive vines, is all that top weight. And the resistance of the leaves can cause it to blow down in a storm. So even if you don't use herbicide, you're way ahead of the game if you just make a cut and take out a portion of that vine. Now, if you are an herbicide user, you could make that cut at the bottom, make the cut up here, and then apply herbicide around the edge. Or if it's big enough, you can use hack and squirt. Okay. For hanging vines, you typically cut them down at ground level. If you're an herbicide user, you then apply a little bit of herbicide to where you made the cut. If you're not an herbicide user, you just make the low cut, but then you make a cut higher up here. You can see where they're hanging off the tree and they've been cut right up at this level. The reason that they're cut at ground level and then higher, we call that a window cut because you can see through it, is to keep the vine from providing a way for new growth to climb up the old vine and into the tree. So you always want to make a low cut and then a high cut for your hanging vines so they don't provide a transportation corridor for new growth. So here we are with these thin hanging vines. And the technique that we use here is sometimes referred to as giving it a haircut. And, you're standing down here at ground level. These vines are only, anywhere from an eighth of an inch to maybe a half an inch. They're not too big. The bigger vines will be closer to the trunk. But for these, you can cut them with just your normal, you can use a hand cutter or loppers. If you have a lot of this to cut, you can use um, hedge trimmers, either manual ones like this if you don't have too much of it to cut, or a powered one, battery powered or gas powered, and you just zip, cut it. And if you're not an herbicide user, you're done. If you are an herbicide user, you would be applying herbicide to the bottom cuts that you've made. Okay, so vines on the ground. Vinca, English ivy, ground ivy, winter creeper, chickweed. You have a couple of different approaches. If there's not a lot, you can hand pull. If there's larger amounts, you can tarp, and you can tarp in the winter. No problem with tarping in the winter. Or you can use foliar spray for any of these vines that you find concentrated out at ground level. Bamboo. Okay, so bamboo is a grass. It acts like a woody plant, but it's a grass. For cutting bamboo, you need to use a thin blade. You don't want to use it seemed like it'd be a great idea to just use a chainsaw and just boom, zoom through it. But the problem is chainsaw will splinter the culms, the stems, and it just becomes a big mess. So you want a thin blade, but there's lots of thin bladed devices you can use for bamboo. If you don't have much of it, you can just use your pruning saw. If you have more of it, you can go to automated devices. This is called a reciprocating saw or a sawzall. This is a sawzall going to work. The blade goes in and out. Very simple, straightforward tool to use. If you have a lot of it, you may want to use the brush cutter again. Brush cutter is a really good tool for bamboo. It's fast, cuts fast, thin blade, cuts clean. It's a great tool. And if you want to do it the old way, you can use a machete. Again, thin blade. Now, if you are using a machete, you don't want to be, typically, you're kind of swinging it at an angle. And if you're cutting downward, you're going to leave a foot and a half of it with a sharp end, like a punji stick. That's really dangerous. If you're going to use a machete, you want to cut up around hip height or so that you're not leaving something that somebody could trip over or fall onto or whatever and injure themselves. Okay. Herbicide treatment for bamboo. Let's say whatever device you use to cut it, you made your cut, and then you can apply a little bit of herbicide right around the edges here. If you look at this photo, you can see all these little dots. That's the vascular tissue. Okay, those are the tubes that are present in all of these plants that conducts the herbicide downward into the roots. So you just need to put a little bit around the edges. Now, I put a little bit around the edges on this one, but a little bit overflowed into the center and was collected there at the diaphragm. You really don't need much. An easier technique than cutting would be to spray them, to spray the leaves. And it's evergreen. It has the leaves in the winter. If you find that you have new growth and it has leaves close to the ground, again, below 5 or 6 feet, so that you're spraying downward, the easiest way to deal with it is to use foliar spray. But usually, quite often, you'll get the growth, you'll get the culm growing up before it has any leaves until it gets higher up, and you can't spray them because it's too high. But if you do find a situation like this and you've got a lot of it, foliar spray is a very effective and efficient technique for you. If you're not an herbicide user, you're just going to cut it. It's going to grow back. You have to come back and cut it again and again until finally it's exhausted the stored energy underground and doesn't grow anymore. Okay, let's see. Lesser celandine. Um, Lesser celandine is tricky. It has a very, very short period of time, maybe about 2 weeks, between when the leaves first come to the surface and when it flowers. Once it flowers, it's starting to produce seed, and you've kind of missed your window. So you need to be watching for when it's coming up. And as soon as it comes up, that's when you want to do whatever it is you're going to do. You can try to dig it out. I'll show you why it's very difficult to effectively do that, but you can try, or you would spray it. Spray it with an herbicide before it flowers. And the reason why trying to dig it out is very difficult. Certainly, I mean, for an area this big or anything bigger, and you can find it situations where there's a half an acre of it. Um, it has a lot of different ways to reproduce vegetatively. So if you try to get it out of the ground, you're probably going to be leaving in some of these root hairs, and it can grow back from them, or some of the tubers. It could grow from those. It has what are called bulblets higher up on the plant. Those can still be in the ground. If any of them are still there, it's going to grow back. Now, not as much is going to grow back as you took out, so you'll have less work to do, but usually for lesser celandine, foliar spray is the technique that's used. Otherwise, you have to just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. Okay, this is first year garlic mustard. Great winter target. It's coming out right now in December, around here anyhow. This is what's called a rosette. It grows in these little clumps called rosettes. They're super easy to hand pull if the soil is moist. This is incised fumort, which is also easy to hand pull when it's first coming out in the winter. But the issue with both of these is how much of it do you have? And here it covers the entire forest as far as the eyes can see. So you're not going to hand pull it. There's just too much of it. So these would be foliar spray targets where you have massive quantities of it. And last but not least, Italian arum. Boy, this is another one that's really difficult to control. We took a look at it yesterday. That's what it looks like. The problem with it is it has these tubers, which are kind of hard to kill and difficult to get out of the ground. So, like lesser celandine, if you try to hand pull them, you're going to get some of it, but probably not all of it. And also, it's very resistant to herbicide. So even with a chemical approach, you're going to have to use it perhaps 2 or 3 times. So you'll kill a lot of it first time around by spraying it. Some is going to grow back. You'll have to spray it again. If you're trying to dig it out, you'll get out a lot of it first try. Some will grow back. You're going to have to dig it out again. So it's just a matter of how much there is. Okay, look, we've thrown an awful lot at you today. This is a document which is just front and back from the Virginia Department of Forestry that tries to summarize a lot of what we've been talking about. It takes the invasives by category, trees, shrubs, vines, herbaceous plants, grasses, and says, what's the best time of year to go after it? And then it says, what's the best techniques to use, manual and chemical assisted? And where they are chemical assisted techniques that are recommended, it gives the herbicide type and the rates at which, concentrations at which it should be used. So this is a good document to get. When you get this video, check out this URL and you can print a copy of it off our website at Blue Ridge PRISM. Sanitation and disposal is something you have to be thinking about. There are some of these plants that you can just cut them and leave them, and others where you can't. You've got to bag them and take them out with you. We haven't got time to go into them plant by plant by plant. This document will help you decide which ones you have to treat with a special sanitation approach. And lastly, safety, not because it's least important, but because it's most important. Wear the right gear in the winter. Not only dress warm, but you got to protect your hands, you got to protect your feet, you got to watch where you're stepping. There's a lot of prickly invasives out there. Beware of poison ivy. this is what it looks like when it's leafed out, but in the winter it's lost its leaves and it looks like this, and you're not sure, are you looking at branches of the tree or is this poison ivy? So you need to be able to identify poison ivy. It's not fun to get exposed to it, even in the winter. Don't pull vines. We're cutting vines on trees. Don't try to pull them off the tree. You can pull them down on yourself and injure yourself. You can break branches off the tree, harm the tree. Just leave them. They're going to come off on their own. Okay. We got a couple other things, but we're kind of running out of time. So thank you for listening.